The deepest points of darkness can give rise to the most powerful points of light. We explored that in our previous class through a close reading of the execution of Rabbi Akiva, placed in the backdrop of the tragic failure and destruction of the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132 to 135-36 CE, and the rise of the genre of martyrdom literature in late antiquity. Rabbi Akiva's story in particular, and the genre as a whole, have served as a beacon for Jews throughout history, not as a call to die for God, but as a call to the heroism of living even in the face of death, to gain eternal life by joining our fate to the national narrative. The power of these stories has only grown as we return to them again and again over the past 2 millennia. Tisha B'Av learning frequently focuses on the colossal events of destruction, and the execution narratives focus on a courageous stand taken by individual heroes at their moment of death. But what about the survivors, those who are left injured physically and emotionally? This war has reminded us profoundly that the acts of heroism and of Mesirut Nefesh are not just isolated moments. Their reverberations are palpable much beyond themselves. They impact the family, the friends, and the community in their wake. When Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion decides on a moment of courageous sacrifice, what is the impact, long and enduring, on those around him? That's the focus of today's class. His martyrdom story, its literary features, and especially its aftershocks, the long-lasting impact of his heroic commitments on his entire family, and especially on his surviving daughter, Beruriah, the only female Talmudic sage. We will do that by contrasting the reaction of Miriam bat Nachtum, the mother of 7 sons, and then examine the character of Beruriah. Let's begin with the execution story itself. The sages said, they found Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, who was sitting and engaging in Torah study and convening assemblies in public with a Torah scroll placed in his lap. When they took him out to be executed, and a simple death here was not considered enough, they brought him and they wrapped him in the Torah scroll he'd been teaching. They encircled him with bundles of branches and they set fire to it. And as if that wasn't enough, they brought tufts of wool, soaked them in water, and placed them on his heart so that his soul would not leave his body quickly. Rather, he'd have a slow, painful death. The Romans relished these brutal, gory public executions. Of course, they're excruciating, but the goal wasn't so much to punish Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, but to strike terror and destruction into the entire population. And I sense that they are really succeeding. His daughter says to him, "Father, must I see you like this?" I can't imagine what it must have been like for anyone to be watching, much less his daughter. Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion said to her, "If I alone were being burned, it would be difficult for me. But now that I'm burning along with the Torah scroll, God, who seeks retribution for the insult accorded to the Torah scroll, will also seek retribution for the insult to me." What a response. His lot is tied to that of the Torah. And the Torah, I remind you, is synonymous with God and nation. He may be losing his temporal life on earth, but he's joining his fate with the long-term health of the Jewish people. And Hanina ben Teradion has perfect faith that his story will have a happy ending. The story continues. His students now say to him, "Our teacher, what do you see?" And Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion replies, "I see the parchment burning, but its letters are flying to the heavens." They said to him, "You should open your mouth and the fire will enter you. It'll make it go quicker." Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion said to them, "It's preferable to God that God who gave me my soul should take it away, and one should not harm oneself by speeding their own death." Rabbi Hanina has put his fate in the hands of God, and he's not willing to do anything that could be construed as suicide. The executioner said to him, "My teacher, if I increase the flame and take off the tufts of wool from your heart, will you bring me to the life of the world to come?" And Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion says, yes, don't be confused. Despite this amazing vision that he's experiencing, he's having also so much pain that he's actually willing to reward the executioner to let it die quickly. The executioner said, swear, take an oath. And Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion takes that oath. The executioner immediately increases the flame and takes off the tufts of wool from his heart. His soul expires quickly, and the executioner immediately leaps into the flames and dies. Who's holding the power here? Is it the executioner or Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion? It's such a twist of fate in the plot when Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion and not the Roman executioner who is actually in control of Olam Haba. A divine voice emerges and says, Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion and the executioner are destined for life in the world to come. Like Rabbi Akiva, there's a bit of theodicy here, a promise of salvation, but there's something a little bit twist. There's also a twist. In this later editorial gloss, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who lives two generations later, in the fifth and the final generation of Tanaim, from 170 to 200, he's active. He wept, and he said, there's one who acquires his share in the world to come in one moment, and there's one who acquires his share only after many years of toil. How puzzling and paradoxical that the two of them receive the same fate, both the executioner and Rabbi Hanina. After the gripping drama and the remarkable dialogue of the story, the first thing to note is the remarkable parallels between the execution story of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion and Rabbi Akiva. We're reminded of the martyrdom script and the structural motifs that we looked at last time. The charges are almost identical, teaching Torah in public. Both are punished through classical torture, one through iron combs and one through burning. Both are things that the Romans loved to employ. There's a mid-torture dialogue, and there's a mystical union. And there's linguistic parallels. In addition to the teaching Torah in public, they use the story uses the language of Yatsa Nishmato, Yatsa Bakol, Muzmanim L'Chaye Olam Haba. His soul expired, a divine voice came out, they're invited to the world to come. Now is a good moment also to point out what we're not actually going to have a chance to examine deeply, but you might remember Pappos from last time. He gave voice to the opposition to Rabbi Akiva's defiant strategy and articulated the principle of chai behen, live but don't die, through the Torah, both before and after the arrest in prison. The story of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion amplifies that voice even further through stories of two rabbis, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma and Rabbi Elazar ben Parata, both of whom carry the title of rabbis and adopt pragmatic survivalist strategies. They not only do they survive successfully, but they seem to get narrative endorsements in the form of miracles. Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion finds himself imprisoned together with Rabbi Elazar ben Parata, against whom there's not one, but there's actually 5 capital charges. And the two of them are bemoaning their fate together. But in the trial, unlike Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, who insists defiantly, declaring his unbending loyalty to the Torah, Kasher tzivani Elokai, Rabbi Elazar ben Parat evades conviction through lies and denial. And if you thought to consider that Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's bold defiance as the more honorable, faithful path, the narrator forces you to think it again. Because Rabbi Elazar ben Parata's 5 lies are each backed up by miracles. Bees speaking in secret code, a perfectly timed pedestrian accident, and the appearance of Elijah the prophet himself. These are clear signs of divine approval. Despite the heroism of martyrdom, choose life, declares the Talmud. I love the Talmud's complexity, but I really love that the Talmud is complex when it holds up multiple and apparently conflicting truths. And it's so resonant. These are real-world dilemmas, and they should evoke humility. Had Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Akiva exhibited a bit more? Maybe some have speculated And who am I to judge? That perhaps the revolt would not have resulted in the total end of Jewish life in Judea for more than 1,500 years. Whatever the traces of ambivalence in the story cycle as a whole, this story is an unabashed endorsement of Rabbi Hanina. It feels important but critical to sit for a moment with the power of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's heroism and his courage, the bold dialogue, his miracles, his mystical visions, his explicit rewards. Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's conviction never wavers. Although the torture is so unbearable that he's willing to grant his executioner eternal life in order for it to end quicker, Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's spiritually triumphant focus, like Rabbi Akiva's, is on the religious dedication, the powerful mystical vision that is possible at that moment. He is immediately awarded eternal life. Both his vision and his reward are explicit endorsements by the narrator. And in his moment of transcendence, it feels like Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion may already have been able to actually see, to use Sarit Zussman's courageous words, that this story will have a happy ending. Like Rabbi Akiva, Hanina ben Teradion achieves eternal life by foregoing temporal life. He ties his fate to that of the Torah and the nation. Among others among us have to wait to see the happy ending, but Hanina ben Teradion has a vision of it at that dramatic moment, and it has endured historically. The image of letters transcending the parchment and flying into the heaven is a tremendous image that has captured the imagination of many people, including in the current crisis. The picture you see here is the picture of the memorial to the police station in Sderot. The IDF made the heartbreaking decision to bomb the police station in Sderot with everyone in it when it became a stronghold for terrorists on Simchat Torah. In this close-up, you can see the mural in which the police station is depicted with a burned Torah scroll whose letters are ascending. Because the Torah, Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and God are all one, I understand the letters to be symbolic of the 70 to 73 police officers, the Simchat Torah synagogue goers, and the other innocent civilians in Sderot who ascended to heavens on that difficult day. But what I want to focus on today is not just on the dramatic moment, but also on the pain that is left in its wake. What about the survivors, specifically in this case, his daughter Beruriah? Is it possible to hold that courage day after brutal day? It's important to note that, as often happens in national trauma, Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion burning with the Torah is just one component of her trauma. We have to add several more factors to understand the fullness of Beruriah's loss. In the closing lines of the verdict, we see that her mother was also sentenced to death, and her sister was sentenced to sexual slavery. Each one of them actually steadfastly declares the justice of the verdict. But it's Beruriah who seems to lose her entire family and become the only survivor on one terrifying day. And if that weren't enough, her brother had become involved in thieves, betrayed them, and then been murdered in her parents' lifetime. By associating the death with the Midrash associates both the Midrash associates the death with a verse from Lamentations. He has broken my teeth and my gravel and covered me in ashes. And by doing so, the Midrash is contextualizing the death as part of the Bar Kokhba revolt, even if we don't fully understand why. Some scholars have suggested that the thievery was a form of political rebellion. There's good reason to think that's the case. Apparently, her brother had dedicated himself to the rebellion, but then lost his enduring conviction. The text reads, "There was an incident involving the son of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, who joined robbers and revealed their secret. They killed him and filled his mouth with dirt and pebbles. 3 days later, his body was found. They placed him on a rope stretcher and sought to laud him in deference to his father." Community members, recognizing the tension between their dedication to the political struggle and family loyalty, seek to eulogize the brother. But the Midrash preserves that the parents' loyalty to the political struggle was unwavering, and they castigated their son, even at his funeral. They placed him on a rope stretcher and sought to laud him in deference to his father, but he did not allow them to do so. He said to them, this is Rabbi Hanina says to them, "Leave him and I'll do the speaking about my son." Father, mother, and sister, we don't know which sister it was, proceed to cite condemnatory verses, such as, "A foolish son is a vexation to father and bitterness to mother." There's not a lot of room for reinterpretation there. What must it have been to live in a family where loss is baked into the fabric and political ideology is more important than family loyalty? It's overwhelming to summarize. Beruriah has lost her father, her mother, and her brother, and her sister has been sold into slavery. Having examined Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's heroic death and the full scope of the loss that Beruriah faced, I think it would be helpful to turn for a moment and hold as a counterpoint the most famous martyrdom narrative of a non-rabbinic hero, known in later sources as Hannah and her 7 sons, but the mother is unnamed in most of the traditions, and in Eicha Rabbah she's named Miriam bat Nachtum, the baker, daughter of the baker, and we'll use that today. It is interesting to note that in addition to the Eicha Rabbah parallel, which is a lot longer, but it's quite similar to the Talmudic one, there's a parallel version of this story, and it appears in Maccabees, there with an unnamed mother. The early Maccabean martyr, that's just to state it out explicitly, that's 300 years earlier. But those early Maccabean martyrdom narratives are preserved only by the Christians in the Apocrypha. Instead, the rabbinic tradition, this story is recast as part of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Because it's in Aramaic, I'm going to go straight to the English. This story is preserved as an exegesis on the verse, "For your sake we're killed all day long. We are reckoned as sheep for the slaughter." Rav Yehuda said, this verse applies to the woman and her 7 sons who died as martyrs for the sake of the sanctification of God's name. They brought in the first of the woman's sons before the emperor and said to him, "Worship the idol." He said to them, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha," is what it says in the Torah. "I am the Lord your God." No way. They took him out and they killed him. And then they brought in another son in front of the emperor, and the emperor says to him, "Worship the idol." And the second son says to him, "But it's written in the Torah, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. You shall not have other gods beside me." And so they took him out and killed him. And so it goes, and I'm not going to go through each one of the 7 sons who are brought out and refuse, each citing their own verse, and including the youngest, who follows suit. But at that moment, the emperor said to him, "I'm just going to throw down my seal before you, and you're going to bend over and pick it up so that people will say that you have accepted the king's authority." The boy said, "Chaval to you, Caesar. Woe to you, Caesar. If you think that I would do that for your honor, and to fulfill your command and do this, then for the sake of the Blessed Holy One, kal v'chomer, how much the more so, alachat kama v'kama." As they were taking him out to be killed, his mother said to them, "Give him to me, bring him over so that I can give him a little kiss." And she said to him, she whispers in his ear, "My son, go and say to your father Abraham, you bound 1 son to the altar, but I bound 7 altars." She too, in the end, went up to the roof, fell, and died. A divine voice emerged and said, "Em habanim smecha," a joyful mother of children, implying that she has raised her children to be devoted to the service of God, and therefore she's happy. This tradition gives special voice to the implications of martyrdom on the family. We're to imagine the rising drama and the suspense with each successive son who's called upon to make the choice and makes the same choice. And we can imagine that each son might take inspiration from his predecessor. But it's really the mother who's the focus of this story. It's her pain that And she stands defiant of her Roman persecutor. She's described as Em Habanim Smecha, a happy mother. Explicitly, she's taking inspiration from her predecessor, Avraham Avinu, his willingness to pay the ultimate price. It's an inspiration to her and to future generations. And her precedent is going to be added to his for time immemorial. But implicitly, she's also to be compared to Sarah Imenu, who, tradition has it, died from the news of Isaac's near-death experience. The Romans don't persecute her directly in this story. She's overcome with anguish, and maybe on some future day, and she jumps to her death from the roof. The narrator seems to sympathize completely with her decision to take her own life, despite describing her as Em Habanim Smecha, the mother of the happy mother of the children. But if she was able to rejoice and be proud at that moment, when the sons stood heroically by their principles, she found it impossible to face the continuing humdrum of life after their death. The pain of continuing life, much less attempting to reconstruct, is beyond conception. She chooses death over the impossible challenge. And the narrator doesn't blame her at all, seems to be completely empathetic. Understanding the desire to give up helps to amplify the heroism in pushing on and rebuilding that we'll see later with Beruriah. In our previous class, we looked at Rav Soloveitchik's famous article, Catharsis, which extols the heroism of emotional control as sometimes greater than that of physical strength. For Rav Soloveitchik, that gvura, heroism, finds powerful expression in the halachic demand that mourners fully confront the abyss of mortality during Shiv'ah, but then find joy in the holidays immediately after, even if they interrupt the Shiv'ah. And now I quote, Avelut, mourning in halakha, consists of more than the performance of external ritual or ceremony. It's much more than that. It's an inner experience of black despair, of complete existential failure, the absurdity of being. It is a grisly experience which overwhelms man, which shatters his faith and exposes his eye awareness as a delusion. The mourner, who has buried a beloved wife or mother, returns home from the graveyard where he's left part of himself and where he has witnessed the mockery of human existence. He is in a mood to question the validity of our entire axiological universe. Yet the halakha addresses itself to the lonely mourner, whispering to him, "Rise from your mourning, cast the ashes from your head. Join the jubilating community and celebrate the holiday as if nothing had transpired, and is as if the beloved person over whose death you grieve were here with you." Is such a metamorphosis of the state of mind of an individual possible? Can one make the leap from utter bleak desolation and hopelessness into joyous trust? Can one replace the experience of monstrosity with the feeling of highest meaningfulness? I have no right to judge. However, I know of people who attempted to perform this greatest of all miracles. Those are the words of Rav Soloveitchik. And he conveys with those words the challenge incumbent on every mourner, even if their loss comes under normal circumstances, and even if they're not compelled to make the transition on a dime. The impossibility of moving from monstrosity to meaning, even to attempt it, is to attempt a miracle. How much more is demanding of the survivors of the trauma of war and persecution as they attempt to reconstruct their life in the shadow of family tragedy? And Beruriah, the daughter who beseeched her father, or maybe it's the daughter who since we don't know which one for sure, but let's assume it's her, who beseeches her father as he surrenders to being burnt together with the Torah scroll, has a mammoth challenge ahead of her. So let's turn now to the figure of Beruriah after her parents' death. We meet her here in an incidental mention. Beruriah, wife of Rabbi Meir, a daughter of Rabbi Hananiah ben Teradion, learned 300 halachot in one day from 300 sages. She's presented here as a genius. She's poised for greatness. She's the director. She's the daughter of a great rabbi, and she's married to a great rabbi. Okay, this is a moment to acknowledge again that we're examining literature and not history. When it comes to Beruriah, this is especially true. She's named half a dozen times explicitly in the Talmud, in Talmudic literature. But these traditions are diffuse and they're scattered and they're predominantly late. We're going to include also additional traditions from the post-Talmudic era. The scholars have done actually super fascinating work about how these stories evolved. But our goal today is to understand what she comes to represent, how she's being depicted, and what that means to us. Overall, the Beruriah traditions treat her as a Torah phenomenon devoid of historical context, meaning she seems to ignore completely the traumatic life that she's experienced. She doesn't invoke it on a day-to-day level. But seeing her with the backdrop of the trauma that we've been studying demands that we reevaluate, that we understand her differently. We've seen the response of Miriam bat Nachtum to tragedy. It's possible to be broken, and it's reasonable to be broken. That highlights Beruriah's remarkableness. Her different response, that of post-traumatic growth. Unlike Miriam bat Nachtum, who, I remind you, the rabbinic tradition endorses, Beruriah does not throw in the towel after tragedy strikes. Quite the opposite, she marries well, and she rises herself as a remarkable scholar, irrespective of her gender. We can imagine how the trauma pushes her to endure, how it would motivate her to rise to greatness, to live in her father's memory. Here she's held up against a male scholar as an example of impossible brilliance. If Beruriah can't do it, nobody can do it. And although we might argue that any child who grew up in a family, in that particular family, and survived is bound to be remarkable, the uniqueness of Beruriah cannot be overstated, and we cannot ignore the context in which it comes. There aren't many women subjects in the Talmud in general, but Beruriah is literally one of a kind. She's the only female scholar, and she teaches multiple times. She's a one of a kind. And let's also reflect on the choice of her husband, Rabbi Meir. He seems a particular kind of a match. He was the primary student of Rabbi Akiva, whose story we examined in the previous episode. The Talmud doesn't say when they're married, but we can imagine that this shared trauma drew them together. In addition to being a survivor himself, even more than Beruriah, Rabbi Meir is a Talmudic model of intellectual prowess. The Talmud says that seeing Rabbi Meir in the Beit Midrash was like seeing someone who was uprooting mountains upon mountains and crushing them against one another. While the Talmud doesn't deal much with emotion, they're carrying the burden of all of that loss. What a couple, driven by ghosts. This is a picture of resilience. But it's also a picture of ongoing trauma. Rabbi Meir and Beruriah continue her father and his teacher's legacy of holding Torah above all. We know all too well how hard it is to pursue life while family members are held hostage. She also leads the struggle and engages the help of Rabbi Meir. This is the tradition that most explicitly describes what they're dealing with as they reconstruct life after the Hadrianic persecutions. Beruriah, the wife of Rabbi Meir, was a daughter of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion. She said to Rabbi Meir, "It is so shameful to me that my sister is sitting in a brothel. You must do something to save her." Rabbi Meir took a vessel of dinars and went. And he said to himself, if no transgression was committed with her, a miracle will be performed for her. If she committed a transgression, no miracle will be performed for her. Okay, take a deep breath. I also paused. There's something that feels hard for us as moderns to wonder about the contingent nature of Rabbi Meir's agreement to save her only if nothing has happened to her. We could judge it harshly, but we could also see it as part of the complexity of post-traumatic growth. Rabbi Meir and Beruriah carry that burden day after day, and unfortunately, recovery has its ups and downs. On some days, Beruriah seems to be playing by the combative rules of the men of the Beit Midrash, maybe even more aggressively than the men. The Talmud pokes fun at the Galileans in general, but Beruriah takes it to a new level. The Mishnah warns men not to engage excessively in discourse with women. Al tarbeh b'sicha im isha. Don't speak too much to women. Okay, perhaps a bit defensively or maybe sarcastically, she points out that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili could have used 2 words to say what he says in 4. And I quote, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili was walking along the way and he met Beruriah. He said to her, Be'ezo derech nelech lelod. Which path shall we walk in order to get to Lod? She said to him, foolish Galilean, didn't the sages say, don't talk much to women? You should have said, Be'ezo lelod, which way to Lod? You could have said it in 2 words and you said it in 4. In the next story, Beruriah teaches a student a lesson kinesthetically. Beruriah came across a certain student who was whispering his studies rather than raising his voice, and she gave him a kick. And she said to him, isn't it written as follows, Arucha b'kol u'shmora, ordered in all things and secure? And what's meant is, if the Torah is ordered in all of your 240 limbs, then you'll be able to keep it, shmora, it will be secure. But if not, you'll forget it. It'll be lost. What better way to make her point about full-bodied learning than a little kick? And yet, it is hard not to feel a bit of compassion for the student who is the object of this slightly aggressive rebuke. It's a man's space, and she seems to outmaneuver them using their rules. But there are also moments when she lets her feminine perspective manifest. And I quote, there were these hooligans in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood who caused him a great deal of anguish. Rabbi Meir prayed for God to have mercy on them, that they should die. And Rabbi Meir's wife, Beruriah, said to him, what is your thinking? What do you mean that you're praying for their death? Do you base it on this verse? Yitamu chatayim min haaretz? Let the sins cease from the land? We may not like to admit it, but who hasn't had fantasies of revenge against our tormentors? Rabbi Meir finds himself praying for their death. But Beruriah chides him to rise above his anger. And of course, she invokes Torah to make her case. The word chatayim is somewhat ambiguous. Does it refer to the sinner or to the sin? But is it written, she says, and now I'm quoting again, is it written, let the sinners cease? Let the sin cease, it's written. Moreover, look at the end of the verse where it says, Rishaim odeinam, and the wicked will be no more. If, as you suggest, transgression shall seek, refers to the demise of the evildoers, how is it possible that the wicked will be no more, that they will no longer be evil? Rather, pray for God to have mercy on them, that they should repent. As if they repent, that the wicked will be no more, but since they'll have repented. Rabbi Meir saw that Beruriah was correct, and he prayed for God to have mercy on them, and they repented. By applying the maternal rule, critique the deed, care for the seed, or love the sin or hate the sin, Beruriah drives the moral rehabilitation of both parties in the conflict through the ways of peace. This is just the kind of feminine Torah we'd love to have a bit more of. We should not be surprised to see different models of courage, as every day evokes different kinds of emotions. It's a long haul to try to continue. Sometimes Beruriah is presented as a sharp, cunning figure who aggressively bests her rival in Torah. Other times, she demonstrates a feminine compassion of the type you might desire to see from a female Torah scholar. Which model should be considered an ideal? Am I supposed to know? But I know she's an inspiration. Like a fish seeking life in the face of ongoing danger from nets, she seeks life and clings to Torah. Her complexity leaves me wondering if this was the happy ending that Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion could foresee. What does it mean to say this story will have a happy ending? I'd like to suggest look at three possible endings for Beruriah. The first is from Rashi. on the words, and some say because of the story of Beruriah. As one time, and this is a story Rashi says, that Rashi tells over, but is not preserved any tradition of it in the Talmud itself or any time before him. As one time she mocked that which the stories said, the conviction of women is weak about them. Nashin datan kalot alehen. And he said to her, by your life, in the end you will concede to their words. How dare you scorn the rabbi's statement that women are weak-minded. And so he commanded one of his students to test her with a matter of sin. And that student pleaded with her so many days that eventually she agreed. And when she found out, she strangled herself. And so Rabbi Meir ran away due to the embarrassment. Whew. This seems, as my colleague Gila Fine has demonstrated, to turn Beruriah into a cautionary tale against what she calls the overreachers. As she describes it, the overreacher reaches beyond their station, becomes guilty of hubris or unbridled arrogance. Hubris leads to nemesis, a fall wherein man is destroyed by the very human nature he sought to overcome. Thus, Beruriah proves the rule that women are dangerous, and when they seek the power of Torah, she becomes the opposite of her overly sexualized sister, who manages to remain without sin, passes Rabbi Meir's test, and is protected by a miracle. Beruriah, on the other hand, studies Torah, and then she oversteps, and then she fails Rabbi Meir's test, and she ends by committing suicide. Not exactly a happy ending, in my opinion. But scholars have argued that the story is an invention, and perhaps even an interpolation, not from the hand of Rashi at all. And yet, it's left its mark on history, justifying excluding women from the Beit Midrash. There's an alternative ending found in the late collection of Midrash Mishlei, which tells another story of Rabbi Meir's wife. Not exactly happy, but in some ways inspiring. Explicating the verse, Eshet Chayil Mi'imtza, a valiant woman who can find, it tells a tale of courage, compassion, and wisdom. They said, there was a story about Rabbi Meir who was sitting and expounding in the study hall on Shabbat afternoon when two of his sons died. What did his mother do? She placed both of them on the bed and spread a sheet over them, i.e. she hid them. At the end of Shabbat, Rabbi Meir came home from the study hall. He said to her, where are my two sons? She said, they went to the study hall. He said, but I scanned the study hall and I didn't see them. They gave him the cup of Havdalah, and he made Havdalah. He went back and said again, where are the boys? She said, they went elsewhere and they're coming soon. She placed food in front of him, he ate, and he benched. After he blessed, she said to him, I have a question to ask you. He said to her, say your question. She said to him, Rabbi, before today a man came and deposited something with me, and now he's coming to take it. Should we return it to him or not? He said, my daughter, the one who has a deposit with him must return it to its owner. She said to him, were it not for your consent, I would not have given it to him. And then she does it. What did she do? She grabbed his hand. She brought him to that room, had him approach the bed, and took the sheet off of them. When he saw both of them dead and lying on the bed, he began to cry and say, my sons, my teachers, my sons in the way of the world, my teachers, that they would enlighten my eyes with their Torah. At that time, she turned to Rabbi Meir and she said, Rabbi, is this not what you told me? Do I not need to return the deposit to its owner? He said, Hashem natan, Hashem lakach, Yehi Shem Hashem mevorach. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken. May the name of the Lord be blessed. It's heartbreaking, actually, to imagine Rabbi Meir and Beruriah, after all that they'd lost, losing their children also. However, here Beruriah draws on all that she has, her Torah knowledge, the wisdom of her life experience, and her love for her children and her husband, to compassionately offer comfort to her husband at the moment of despair. She has leveraged her life experience to be a force for good. She's developed a feminine Torah that makes even unhappy endings bearable. But when we adopt, those are two endings. But there's a third. When we adopt the long view of the happy ending, we could consider this third possible ending. The seed that was planted by Beruriah in the 2nd century began to take root in 1917 when Sarah Schneer founded the first Beis Yaakov school, and eventually women's learning flourishing into a major movement of which I was an early beneficiary. What does it mean to say this story will have a happy ending? To be resilient, to attempt post-traumatic growth does not mean to entirely escape post-traumatic stress. The two unquestionably coexist. When we take the long view of history, as Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Hananiah ben Teradion, Beruriah, and Sarit Sussman urge us to do, we have to be prepared for ups and downs. Am hanetzach lo mifached miderech aruka. The eternal nation cannot be afraid of the long road. The blessing and the challenge of finding meaning by joining our fate to the fate of the nation is that the ending lies undetermined again, and that we plant seeds, but we don't always know how and when they're going to sprout. But the rabbinic depiction of Beruriah suggests that while it may be incredibly difficult, it is possible and it's worthwhile to soldier on. May God give us strength to continue to do so. To summarize what we have learned today. We began with the story of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion's execution, its parallels to Rabbi Akiva, paradoxically including significant ambivalence about his defiant path on the one hand, and full-throated endorsement of his sacrifice and courage, his willingness to forgo his temporal life to be part of the national narrative, his belief that the story will have a happy ending, on the other hand. We saw how, among other things, it served as an inspiration in the Sderot police station memorial. But rather than focus only on the courageous stand taken by Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion as an individual hero, at his moment of death, we gave our attention to the survivors, those who were injured physically and emotionally. The losses in the Bar Kokhba revolt were incredibly broad. No Jew was untouched. Beruriah in particular was confronted with the loss of 2 parents and a brother. Her sister was held hostage. Rav Soloveitchik amplified the challenge of embracing life post-tragedy, and the Miriam, the daughter of the baker, was met with empathy when she chose to surrender to mourning, which just helps us hold Beruriah as even more of a model of heroism and of Mesirot Nefesh that was ongoing, a struggle day after day with moments of triumph and moments of challenge. She dedicated herself to Torah, sometimes playing aggressively by the men's rules and sometimes bringing in a uniquely feminine perspective. We wondered if it was possible to find a happy ending in her personal life or not, and if perhaps her happy ending only comes nearly 2 millennia later when she serves as an inspiration to the flourishing world of observant women's Torah study. It was a complex story, one that only brings home further how hard and speckled post-traumatic growth is. The road may be long, but Beruriah gives us courage to continue that journey. I'd like to close with the Yehuda Amichai poem that captures the challenges of surviving in the face of so much loss for me especially well. It's called The Diameter of the Bomb. Koter ptsatsa haya 30 סנטימטרים, וכותר תחום פגיעתה כ7 מטרים. ובו 4 הרוגים ו11 פצועים. The diameter of the bomb was 30 centimeters, and the diameter of its effective range about 7 meters. With 4 dead and 11 wounded, and around these, in a larger circle of pain and time, 2 hospitals are scattered and 1 graveyard. But the young woman who was buried in the city she came from, at a distance of more than 100 kilometers, enlarges the circle considerably. And the solitary man mourning her death? at the distant shores of a country far across the sea includes the entire world in the circle. And I won't even mention the crying of orphans that reaches up to the throne of God and beyond, making a circle with no end and no God. Lo edaber klal al zakat yatomim hamigi'ah ad l'kisei Elohim umisham v'hala v'oseh et ha'ma'agal le'en sof ve'ein Elohim. May we begin strength to face this pain with wisdom, with courage, and with resilience. Thank you very much.